Evolution, Chapter 17. Take a break. Jen had not been expecting dinner to mean dinner in Paris, at Jennifer Nocturne's private chalet. The movie star was surprised to learn that she had never been to France. She had been to Egypt once, accidentally due to a spaceship crash. Mexico was another one, though technically flying across the border as Stinkfly to stop the Forever Knights from gaining a sword of ultimate power wasn't all that legal, so she kept that one to herself. The team had been to the Arctic fighting Animo not too long ago, but aside from that, she hadn't been out of the country. The only reason she had a passport was just in case she needed to go out of the country for a mission. But here she was, sitting on a balcony with a 5-star meal and a beautiful girl, only 3 years older than her, sitting across from her. A woman very, very interested in space and all the things Jen had seen. Dinner was very pleasant, with amazing food, though it did run a bit late. Since it was Saturday, Jennifer offered to let her stay the night, even sending out for a comfortable set of PJs for her. She also ordered a swimming suit so Jen could enjoy her pool and hot tub with her, but unfortunately the blonde ordered a 2-piece. Jen wanted to refuse, but she wasn't sure how, so she didn't. Miss Nocturne's eyes widened at the sight of the scars that decorated Jen's skin. "How did those happen?" she asked softly as Jen slipped into the hot tub. Jen shrugged. "Being a hero is hard." She left it at that, and Jennifer Nocturne didn't push. Instead, she swam a lap around the pool and came back up to Jen. "Hey, speaking of heroes, Captain Nemesis invited me to a party tomorrow. Interested in being my +1? Jen blinked. "Absolutely. Captain Nemesis is one of my childhood heroes." The blonde grinned and tapped Jen on the nose. "You are too adorable. We can go shopping in the morning if you want. Find a nice dress for you." Jen shrugged at her. "You don't have to do that. I own a dress. Somewhere." The movie star laughed. "No trouble at all. Besides, my publicist thinks it would be good for both of us, being seen together. So, what's space travel really like? I was in a movie about it once, but I doubt it's the same." Jen grinned as they began to swap stories. The next day was fun. Jen called her grandfather on her communicator and let him know where she was and that Jennifer Nocturne had offered to take her shopping that day. He insisted she go and enjoy herself, take a day off for once. He would call if they found anything they couldn't handle. If she was honest, she had a blast. They traveled all over Paris that day, shopping and seeing the sights. It was nice to have a day where she didn't have to be the one the focus was on. Though, even here, both she and the movie star were stopped for autographs. By the end of the day, both girls had new dresses and even jewelry. Jennifer Nocturne had insisted. She took Jen to her personal stylist back in the States. Both girls were dressed up and had their makeup done, along with their hair. They took the movie star's helicopter to the party that night. Jen felt a little out of place, even in the new dress. It was bright green with a black lace overlay on the skirt. It fell just to Jen's knees. She wore her usual necklaces, though both were now on display. She also had a cuff around the wrist opposite the Ultimatrix. It was silver to match her other jewelry, along with a silver chain belt around her waist. What made her feel a bit worse was when Captain Nemesis dismissed her and kept forgetting her name. He was supposed to be a hero, the kind she could work with, but she honestly didn't see herself working with him very well. By the end of the party, she was glad to be dropped off at home, even though she was dropped off in the helicopter. Gwen and Kevin were waiting there for her. "So, how'd it go?" Jen rolled her eyes at Kevin. Gwen held up a magazine. It had a photo of Jen and Jennifer Nocturne on the cover. The title read, "JJ, America's Hottest New Couple?" Jen snatched the glossy magazine out of her cousin's hand and flicked through it to the article. "We're not dating," Jen insisted as she spotted that maybe Miss Nocturne's private French home wasn't as private as she'd hoped. Somehow, the press had gotten photos of them in the swimming pool and hot tub together alongside the ones from their day out in Paris. Kevin shrugged. "I just can't believe they're calling you two JJ. Most couple names are at least fun." Gwen kicked her boyfriend in the shin. Jen took off the designer cuff around her wrist and tossed it onto the table. Hard to combine names when they're the same name, Kevin. Gwen looked her up and down, admiring the dress. I think that dress might be more expensive than my house. Jen nodded, looking like she didn't want to sit down in this piece of finery. I can confirm that. She wouldn't take no for an answer. I need to go change into something not made of money. She shook her head as she went into her room. She came out about 10 minutes later in sweatpants and her usual black t-shirt. The dress was over her arm. She slipped into her parents' room and came out without the dress. Kevin raised an eyebrow. You really think my room can be trusted with something that expensive? Gwen nodded at her cousin's judgment, and Jen's communicator beeped. What's up?
Hey, Jen, it's Pierce. We got some odd readings down by the docks. A portal of some kind just opened. Want to head down and check it out?
Jen nodded. Gladly. More my scene than that party was. She stepped out of the house, grabbing her jacket on the way, and spun the dial on the Ultimatrix, transforming into Jet Ray, and taking off into the night. Gwen and Kevin glanced at each other, shaking their heads slightly. Chapter 18. Not So Friendly. The fight with the Dimension 12 robots on the pier was quick. Jen took down half a dozen of them, while Captain Nemesis only took out one. She frowned at him as he stated that she might make a good sidekick someday. You're kidding, right? You took down one. I busted up the rest of them. Harangue twisted her words almost as soon as they were out of her mouth, and Nemesis seemed on the obnoxious reporter's side.
If you're feeling competitive, why not channel that into something more helpful? A friendly competition between you and me. Tomorrow at noon. All proceeds to charity, of course.
Jen frowned. I can do tomorrow, but it'll have to be after 4. Nemesis raised an eyebrow at her.
Something better to do?
Jen shrugged. I have class. I'm still in school. That seemed to take Nemesis aback a bit, but he nodded.
Fair enough. Tomorrow at the old train depot, 4:30.
Jen nodded and spun the dial on the Ultimatrix, turning into Big Chill. Stay in school, kids. She hissed out at the camera that wasn't working for Harangue and took off into the night, vanishing as she flew. Not keen on being followed tonight. The next day at school was, well, interesting. Her classmates seemed to be in two minds. Most seemed to be rooting for her to win the competition, but a small percentage of the people at school seemed to be rooting for Captain Nemesis. Julie just shook her head. Jen, this whole thing stinks. The brunette nodded as they worked on their chemistry lab. You're telling me, sulfur always stinks. Julie frowned as Jen carefully poured the chemicals. Not what I meant. This whole thing with Captain Nemesis. Jen nodded, setting down the flask and adjusting her safety goggles. I'll admit, that isn't everything I'd hoped for either. Julie held up the assignment. Jen glanced over it and picked up the next chemical as she continued to speak. I mean, I used to have his poster. He was supposed to be cool, you know? Julie nodded. They do say never meet your heroes. Julie stated matter-of-factly. Jen rolled her eyes at her friend. Not all heroes are bad. Julie nodded. Some are just nerds. Jen made an incensed noise. Julie laughed. Jen, I've seen you cry over puppies because they were just too cute. Jen rolled her eyes as they finished the set experiment. The competition went, well, Jen wasn't sure if it went well or not. She won, thanks to forearms in the tiebreaker, so there was that, but it didn't really feel like a victory, especially not when she offered a hand to help Captain Nemesis out of the mud pit they'd been using for their tug-of-war competition, and he smacked it away. She frowned as she stepped away, transforming back to normal. She'd promised to drop Julie off at practice. She left as soon as the throng of people parted for her, and dropped her best friend off at practice before heading to her cousin's house. Harangue, of course, implied that she'd cheated, which made Kevin scoff.
Female Tetramans are stronger than even male Tetramans. It's no wonder you beat him with 2 arms behind your back.
Jen nodded slightly. Gwen, though, was frowning. What's up, cuz? You've got that look that means there's something you don't want to tell me. Gwen sighed. Kevin and I did some investigating into where the goons who tried to kidnap Jennifer Nocturne got those high-grade weapons. Jen nodded. She'd been curious, but a bit distracted to look it up herself. They were manufactured by one of Nemesis's companies, but none of the weapons have been reported missing or stolen.
So either your hero was going to look into it himself and didn't want the bad press, or...
Kevin left his sentence hanging. Or he knew the whole time. Jen stated. Kevin nodded.
Which would track, since he's paying for their lawyers.
Kevin said. Jen shook her head and sat down on the couch. Fuck. Kevin nodded.
Yeah, never meet your heroes, kid.
Jen rolled her eyes. I'm not that bad, right? Kevin shrugged. Gwen looked her over. Well, you snore. You're bad at keeping up with your schoolwork, but you're a good hero. Jen grinned at her cousin. Always keeping me humble, Gwen, thanks. Gwen nodded. Jen's stomach grumbled. She stood and stretched. I need food. I'm gonna head to Burger Shack. You guys want anything? Gwen shook her head. Kevin shrugged. We're good. Jen was on her way to the restaurant when she thought maybe Julie might want something to eat after her practice. She pressed a button on her steering wheel. Call Julie Yamamoto, she said, and the wireless setup in her car began to ring. There was a click as the line was picked up. Hey, Julie, I'm headed to Burger Shack. You want? A voice that was certainly not Julie cut across her.
Julie can't come to the phone right now. I've got her. You want to see her alive again? Come get me.
The dial tone rang out. Jen swore and pressed the call button again. Call Gwen Tennyson. The phone only rang twice before Gwen picked up. Hey, could you actually grab me a burger? Nemesis took Julie. Silence reigned. I tried to call her. Nemesis answered the phone. He called me out. Meet me at his tower in 5 minutes.
We're already in the car,
Kevin called out, and Jen nodded. Good. Don't make an entrance. I'll keep him distracted. Jen pulled up to the tower and stepped up to the doors. They slid open, and Jen stepped inside and flipped the dial on her Ultimatrix to Humongosaur. She turned the dial on her chest and felt herself grow even taller, a wrecking ball growing on the end of her tail. It was the first thing she'd used on the ex-hero when he came out to confront her. As it turned out, he had taken Julie and Jennifer Nocturne. He had it set up so both would fall at the same time, leaving Jen only able to rescue one. But Jen had something he didn't. Friends. Gwen and Kevin rescued Jennifer Nocturne, while Jen switched to Goop and rescued Julie. It didn't take her too long to figure out that Nemesis was overheating and used it against him. You were supposed to be a hero. What happened to you? This was never about publicity. This was about doing the right thing. She shook her head and dropped the defeated hero. She shook her head at him again as the cops came in and arrested the man. They handed Jennifer Nocturne off to them as a witness. Julie gave her statement and Jen took her home. She was still shaking with anger. Julie hugged her. Thanks, Jen. Jen hugged her back. I'm glad you're okay, Julie.